Welcome to my talk on the care expense in delirium. My name is Shibley Rahman. This is not new. The idea that the carer could work with the person with delirium and health professional has been going round and round circles for the last decades. Therefore, it's probably worth wondering why I'm doing this talk at all. And in a sense, I'm reinventing the wheel, but maybe the wheel has to be reinvented yet again. So I'm actually quite loath to jump on the bandwagon. I've pointed out previously that delirium awareness should be sustainable and meaningful. It affected me and my mum, and it's very deep in my DNA. So it's not for hashtags, really. And I like to say that it goes to the heart of leadership. Leadership is not just for medics and managers, it's for people like me uh, at the front line as well. With my mum, a model of leadership is distributed leadership, where something's not done to you, but done with you, very much on the ethos of co-production. And in this review by Richard Bolden, you see that it's a drive away from a leader followership model. And maybe the drive for this has been need to embrace cross-functional teams, speed delivery, complexity. Of course, these are archetypically issues for delirium care in England, Scotland, and other jurisdictions. So, well, thanks to Sharon and Elsa and Daniel, who inspired me. There were many others, including my mum and Kate there. So, why track down the carer? Well, I would argue, along with most reasonable people, that the carer is in a good position, if available, to tell you the diagnosis. Of course, there are people who don't have carers, friends, family. I can see that. It's very sad. I'm recording this on Mother's Day, and I know people who don't have mothers. It encourages shared decision making, potentially involvement care, or across the patient journey from start to finish. And of course, in the community where people don't live in hospital forever, on the whole, and in the community, carers are in prime position, if available, to prevent further episodes. This slide is from Professor Alison McCulloch, a definition of delirium as change in the patient. Of course, Professor McCulloch does qualify this, but that fundamentally is what I have to go on as a carer. Is mum very different to how she used to be? Is there a new baseline? And this is difficult in advanced dementia, where mum could have PTSD, a term you may disagree with, abrupt changes in behavior, agitation, aggression, or it could be delirium. The problem about delirium is that it's a medical emergency, and I would like to draw attention to the utility box here. What's the point of recognizing delirium? An article I co-wrote with various authors and also neuropsychiatry. And I think one of the biggest issues here is strong association between delirium and subsequent long-term cognitive impairment. And the other thing I like to stress for the sleep is the distress And acknowledging delirium, calling it by name is important because it validates somebody's distress. I found delirium incredibly distressing as a carer, and it was distressing, I'm sure, for my mum. Delirium is actually, for me, a prototypical neuropsychiatric syndrome. It's exactly 20 years since I obtained my own PhD from Cambridge after a 20-minute driver and no corrections I hasten to add. And the thing about the uh, delirium network is nobody knows what it is. And I think this is a growing shame that for this syndrome, which is neuropsychiatric, there have been no attempts really, apart from a few, to identify what neurally, in terms of cognition, is going wrong. There have been excellent researchers elsewhere, and I would like to draw attention to new information, e.g., we and beginnings of fMRI. From what we know, delirium seems to obliterate the network involved in the perception of self. This is no surprise if you talk to anyone with delirium. They have no idea who they are, where they are, what they're doing. Uh, it's as if they've lost all self. Now, this causes a big problem for person-centered care. And looking at the literature of the last 30 years, uh, it's striking that carers or caregivers called in other descriptions come across as secondary victims of the delirium episode. And they themselves, including me, suffer from depression, anxiety, and other mood disorders. And they're supposed to be dissatisfied with the acute experience. Of course, a lot of acute experiences are very good, and medics are working very hard, and along with other clinicians working very hard. But the care experience does go wrong in certain ways, and we should learn not blame from this. Uh, the hospital admission is seen as a crisis, often seen as an abrupt schism in care. It is far from respite. In fact, it is incredibly stressful to travel to a hospital and then come home wondering whether your mum's going to be alive the next morning. So Jackie and others, May Flatley and Julian Meyer, all greats in research and in service provision, looked at expenses of this. And unsurprisingly, it's all about the relationships. Worse than that, if you look at person-centered care, there's a real depersonalization which occurs not just from the delirium process, but from the hospital admission process. And therefore, it's not surprising that there needs to be more work on relationship-centered care in delirium. So I think generally it'd be useful to work with carers, not work against them. And this, of course, is not new. 20 years ago, there was talk about carers coming to central aid. I don't think this is true. I think carers are seen more as a nuisance than actually a help. And this is very offensive and very upsetting and very hurtful. And I don't think the talk of what matters to you, it sounds good in conferences, but it's actually not happening in reality. So stakeholder expenses do matter. And my experience has been overwhelmingly one of poor communication. But people are busy and stressed, and no doubt the COVID pandemic has made this worse. An element with dementia and delirium, however, is a phenomenon called diagnostic overshadowing, where the identity of the disease, delirium or dementia, is so powerful that all else flies out the window. So much like my observations for dementia delirium elsewhere, I think there's a lot to be learned from other areas of geriatric medicine, including stroke. So this paper talks about stroke intervention. And here they're talking about daily support to survivors. Well, there is actually a notion that after the delirium episode, people can survive and they're not just lost to follow-up and just forgotten about. Caring well can be rewarding, but incredibly stressful as well. And this depends on the political makeup of what you want to do to help people, which might include web-based training, but actually I want to draw attention to this paper, which talks about Norway. Of course, Norway is in the eye of a different storm at the moment, but here they're talking about carers being active and visible partners, and they've legislated for that. Now, you can't regulate for culture entirely or at all, but it may be a necessary start. Carers tend to remain dissatisfied, and actually, this paper from 1999, when I'm publishing Brain, about something that's totally different, said carers are really important here, especially in the context of patients who can't articulate what's wrong with them. Now, this might include hyperactive delirium, where they're aggressive, often one, can't settle down, or fast asleep all the time, hypoactive delirium, or a mixture of the two, mixed delirium. Another paper, loads of greats, much greater than me, Jill Subi, about unsigned quality of life in dementia. And here are some things which could be better for people like me who are caring for mum with dementia, repeated episodes of delirium. We can be given support, time for ourselves, and scope to do things. Believe it or not, me giving this talk to you is an enjoyable activity because it breaks the monotony of my caring all the time. And if you understand our expenses, you can begin to give us support. And again, it's the communication that people who can't communicate feel especially vulnerable. Anyway, thinking positively, there can be stuff done in the community to make people feel valued. Carers want to feel valued, and especially if they can prevent a delirium. That's a big achievement. Here's a paper from recently which talks about the intervention to prevent delirium. The point I want to make here is that hyperactive delirium tends to be seen as silent, but actually it has greater mortality, so it's not happily sleeping. It's actually quite dangerous, and hyperactive delirium is visible. But not blaming people, but we could do more to educate people in the workforce, especially about delirium. When I qualified in 2001, delirium was the acute confusional state. And those sense of now what? That shouldn't be the case 20 years on. But actually, talking of which, I've just published a paper with Kit Barrett in Age and Aging. Given that delirium was the overwhelming presentation in COVID for the older age group. Now what? So, with the demise of discharge to assess, what's going to happen? And for people who have recurrent delirium who may develop dementia, now what? Where are they going to go? Memory clinic? What about their physical decline, deconditioning, frailty? Now what? Anyway, there ends my sermon. If you want to follow any of my rants, they're on Twitter, which are, of course, respectful to my colleagues. My name is Shibley. Here's a book. I think everyone's got something to sell on this bandwagon, and I'm no exception. But I've spent a year unpaid writing this book to help the workforce, so please forgive me if I mention it. And with introductions from Sharon and Lester, and afterwards by Dan, Neil, and Amit, I'd like to say a word about Daniel. He's amazing. And that's the end of my talk. Thanks very much. I wish you well.